Dear friends, this video will open your eyes to a hidden reality. He will show, like the clothes we wear can carry stories of suffering invisible to our eyes. After watching, you will never look at labels from the same again form. If you care about social justice, subscribe to this channel, leave your like and write conscious consumption in the comments. We'll talk about forced labor of Uyghurs Muslims in cotton factories in China and as large brands global are connected to this exploration. China turned Xinjiang into a massive source of cotton produced under questionable conditions, and what has been the result? Behind economic growth statistics, there is the silent suffering of forced Muslim workers to abandon their traditions and religious practices in the production lines. So if you believe in dignity of free and fair work, watch this video until the end. We are in 2022. China has consolidated itself as a factory of the world, producing most of the products we consume daily. During this period, the Uyghurs Muslims in Xinjiang were incorporated into a vast system of work, forced, especially in the cotton industry. Refuse participate in these programs of work transfer could result in detention. Even perform prayers for prayers during office hours was considered suspicious behavior. Cotton processing plantations and factories were expanded throughout Xinjiang, a region that produces 20% of world cotton. Friends, before 2016, the work on cotton farms in Xinjiang was difficult, but the Uyghurs they could maintain some control over their religious lives. During the following years, the government implemented what it called eradication of poverty through work. As a result, hundreds of thousands of Uyghurs were transferred to complexes, industrial, many of them surrounded by walls and surveillance towers. The short time free that left was filled with mandatory Mandarin classes and education. Patriotic. At that time, maintaining basic Islamic practices in Xinjiang factories became almost impossible. If a Uyghur worker were caught by performing prayers during office hours or observing Ramadan fast, could face severe punishments or be sent for education. All aspects of workers' lives were rigidly controlled, since feed times until rest periods. Friends, the authorities feared that any expression of religious identity interfering with productivity, so they implemented a system in which even small gestures of devotion were prohibited. The result was a workforce living under constant pressure, separated from their families and traditions. Communities in the region were forced to participate in work programs in distant places. To ensure that Xinjiang's cotton remained competitive in the global market, the human cost was deliberately ignored. Each worker, Muslim, was forced to sacrifice his religious and cultural identity to avoid even more serious consequences. So you can imagine what it is like to work under such conditions. You might think that with so much international pressure and complaints, the great global markets would have completely detached from Xinjiang's cotton. Friends, we want to clarify that even after investigations and reports, the complexity from supply chains makes this challenge much greater than it seems. But global consciousness on this theme is like a seed, once planted, continues to grow and eventually produces fruits in the form of concrete actions and changes in corporate policies. This is a testimony of the power of information and shared responsibility. There are reports detailing how Xinjiang's cotton enters the global chains of supply through indirect routes. These reports are evidence that transparency in productive chains can be reached only with corporate promises, but requires surveillance, constant and independent verification. China may have created a system that makes it difficult to track the exact origin of the products, textiles, but the growing movement for transparency is challenging these structures. There are still companies and global brands that are taking concrete measures for ensure that products do not contain Xinjiang cotton. During meetings with investors, some of these corporations have faced direct questions about their supply policies. Human rights experts confirm that the number of companies implementing traceability systems has increased, and that consumer pressure will continue to grow in the coming years until systemic changes are implemented. Friends, it is estimated that more than 570,000 people have been mobilized for the cotton harvest in Xinjiang only through government programs. We would like to share with you a specific case that we believe will deeply impact your view on this topic. The dignity of work is certainly a fundamental value in Islam, where the Prophet Muhammad taught about the importance of fair and well-paid work. China involuntarily raised this debate by using Muslim workers in questionable conditions. This case happened in 2021. A large brand, International Clothing, was under public scrutiny. The company had publicly declared that it did not use Xinjiang cotton in your products. However, independent investigations revealed indirect connections with suppliers linked to the region. In this context, an independent textile auditor who visited factories in the suppliers shared his findings at an international conference. I will report his words exactly as he presented them. He was driving audits in textile factories in several Chinese provinces, and he said, "Everything that I document, I will share with my own words." He said, "It was during that inspection. I commented with my team, if we follow the trail of this wire cotton through the complex web of intermediaries, we will inevitably reach Xinjiang." Companies created elaborate systems to obscure the real origin of materials. Listening to this, I was very intrigued and wanted to understand how this system of obscuration. My colleagues explained some of the methods and started to investigate deeper. With forensic fiber screening methods, I was able to identify patterns that indicated the true origin of cotton. When I visited a factory that provided for several international brands, I noticed that the workers were predominantly transferred from Xinjiang. After talking discreetly with some employees, I discovered a worrying reality. The auditor who reported me this could not include all his findings in the official report. I approached one of the workers during the break and asked, "Did you come to work here voluntarily?" He looked around nervously, but he answered in a low voice, "What choice we had? Refusing would mean consequences for our families who were in Xinjiang. Why were these people so far from home?" When I observed more attentively, there was rigid control over their lives. I immediately noticed that the dormitories were separated from other workers, with entries monitored by cameras. The auditor reported that when he tried to verify the conditions of the dorms, it was informed that this area was outside the boundaries of the inspection for security. No one questioned this limitation because it was presented as standard procedure. After this experience, I started to notice standards similar in other facilities. All experienced auditors knew these barriers to complete inspection, but rarely mentioned them in the final reports, fearing losing access to factories. In future visits, no one shared these observations openly because it could compromise important commercial relationships. I just document what was allowed and I moved on. As I visited more facilities, I noticed a system meticulously designed to maintain the appearance of compliance while hid the fundamental realities. I asked a more experienced auditor as deal with these limitations, and he answered frankly that this was the cat game and mouse of the audit industry. During my investigations, I was able to track how cotton was transported from Xinjiang to other provinces, where it was mixed with cotton from other origins, before officially entering the global supply chain. The factories kept documentation show what they bought from intermediaries outside Xinjiang. Technically true, but omitting the real origin of the raw material. I was impressed with the complexity of the system and wanted to understand how global marks responded when confronted with this evidence. One day, I attended a meeting where representatives of a large brand discussed audit reports. The document had identified moderate risks in the chain of supplies, an euphemism to significant problems. I was intrigued and asked the responsible executive if they really believed that its products were free of Xinjiang cotton. He sighed and said, "Wow, supply chain has 7 levels of suppliers. We can audit until the 3rd level with some confidence. In addition, we depend on certificates and written guarantees." I asked then why they didn't implement more tracking technologies, advanced. To my surprise, he replied, "The cost would be passed on to end consumer. Our research shows that although consumers say import with ethics, few are willing to pay more for it." No one in the room contested this logic, because it reflected the economic reality of sector. Most brands were more concerned with public perception than with deep structural changes. When a brand is confronted with evidence of problems in its chain supplies, the typical answer is to add another audit layer. Fundamentally rethink your business model. A 6-hour audit every 2 years in a factory with 3 daily shifts will never reveal the truth complete, especially when workers are afraid to speak. The auditor then reported that when he completed his work in that region, he had accumulated evidence sufficient to establish clear connections between global marks and cotton produced with forced labor in Xinjiang, but knew that publishing everything could cost your future access to these facilities. The professional ended his report by reflecting on how consumers around the world wear clothes without knowing the human stories behind each piece. Friends, can create complex systems to obscure the origin of products and make it difficult for liability. But when consumers, brands and governments decide prioritizing human dignity above profit, real changes become possible. Friends, considering this reality, I remember the Islamic principle that emphasizes the importance of ethical and fair trade, where no part should be explored or impaired. Write ethical fashion or decent work in the comments. Share this video to raise awareness about the connections between our consumption and human rights. We will meet again with a new video. Until then, that we can all do choices more conscious about the products we buy.